12,000 feet over the Philippine Sea. 5 Japanese Zeros circle like sharks. The American P-40 Warhawk banks hard left. G-forces compress the pilot's chest. Vision tunnels. Behind him, tracers arc orange and white through the morning sky. His engine coughs. Oil pressure drops. He should be dead in seconds. Instead, he pushes the stick forward into a maneuver no textbook taught him. The Zeros overshoot. They can't follow. 4 seconds later, only 2 are still closing. He'll escape 3 of them. The other 2 will chase him across the island chain for the next hour. June 1944. This is how survival begins. Not with courage, but with a mistake so profound it becomes wisdom. The dawn air over Clark Field tastes like salt and rust. Rows of P-40 Warhawks shimmer in the heat, their olive fuselages streaked with dust from the runway. The ground crew moves through them methodically, checking oil coolers, testing control surfaces, loading ammunition drums into the wings. The temperature will reach 98 degrees by noon. The humidity makes sweat start before dawn breaks. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This is the Pacific Air Force in June 1944. Not the glory of the European theater. Not the headlines or the decorated aces. This is the grinding, exhausting business of keeping fighters in the air over water where no one photographs the wreckage. Second Lieutenant Thomas Werner is 18 years old. He has been flying combat missions for 6 weeks. He will be dead within 48 hours if someone doesn't change the rules of how men fight at altitude. He does not look like a fighter pilot. Tall, lean, with dark hair that sits uneasily under his cap. He has a mechanic's hands, calloused, scarred from tinkering, and a librarian's eyes. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, he observes more than he speaks. His squadron mates call him Vern. They do not call him much else. He is too quiet, too methodical, too prone to asking questions about why things are done the way they are done. Thomas grew up in rural Nebraska, outside a town called Scottsbluff that the Depression nearly destroyed and the war partially resurrected. His father ran a grain elevator. His mother kept the books. He had 2 younger sisters and an older brother who died in 1941, not in combat, in a car accident outside Lincoln. Thomas was 16. He enlisted the week after Pearl Harbor, before grief could calcify into something worse. Ground school fascinated him in a way combat never could. Aerodynamics. The P-40's fuel system. How a carburetor breathed air at altitude. He studied the manuals the way other cadets studied pin-up photographs. He sketched diagrams in the margins. He asked his instructors questions that made them uncomfortable because he was asking why, not how. Primary training took place in Stearman's. Open cockpit, fabric wings, and the honest feedback of an airframe that told you everything. Thomas soloed after 8 hours. His instructor wrote, "Smooth on the controls. Thinks before he moves. Not aggressive, but thorough." Advanced training brought him to fighters. The P-40 was not the fastest or the highest-flying aircraft in the American inventory. It could not climb with a Spitfire. It could not turn with a Zero at altitude. But it was built to survive punishment. Its radial engine could absorb hits that would shred an Allison. Its fuselage was tough enough to keep flying with pieces missing. Thomas understood this at a level deeper than instruction. He felt how the P-40 wanted to be flown, not fought, flown. It was honest about its limitations. You could not cheat it. You could not will it to do something it was not designed to do. The aircraft that tried to turn with a Zero at high altitude was an aircraft that died. He arrived in the Pacific in April 1944. His first mission was a routine patrol over open water. He fired no shots. His squadron mates were veterans, men with 15, 20, even 30 missions. They had learned the hard way what the P-40 could and could not do. They did not trust rookies. Trust was earned through survival, and Thomas had not yet been tested. His first combat came on April 18th. A photo reconnaissance run. He stayed in formation. He followed orders. A Japanese reconnaissance aircraft was reported 200 miles northeast. The squadron climbed to intercept. Thomas flew tail-end Charlie, the last position, the place for new pilots. They never found the Japanese aircraft. They turned back after burning fuel for 90 minutes. Thomas landed without firing his guns, without seeing an enemy aircraft, without understanding what combat actually felt like. The second mission was different. By June 1944, The air war in the Pacific has shifted. American forces have island-hopped closer to the Japanese homeland. The B-29 Superfortress is beginning its bombing campaign against the homeland itself. Fighter escort is no longer optional. It is the only reason the bombers return. The Japanese have adapted. They have moved their best fighter units west. The Zero is no longer the dominant aircraft. It has been superseded by the Nakajima Ki-84 Frank and the Kawanishi N-1K George, both faster and more maneuverable than the Zero, both serious threats to American fighters. But there is something else, something the intelligence reports call Zero Tactics Modified. Japanese pilots have learned that altitude is power. They climb above the bomber streams. They position themselves higher and faster. When they attack, they dive. The attack runs at high speed, guns blazing for 3 or 4 seconds. Then they pull out of the dive and climb back up for another run. It is a tactic that preserves energy and denies the lumbering bombers any chance to evade. American fighters are supposed to protect the bombers, but the P-40 cannot climb to 30,000 feet. Its engine starves for oxygen above 25,000 feet. The bomber escort fight is happening where the P-40 cannot fight. In the last week of May, losses spike. 3 bombers shot down. 2 fighters lost in escort combat. 1 pilot bails out and is picked up by a submarine. 1 pilot disappears over open water. The squadron commander, Major Robert Chandler, calls a meeting. Chandler is 34 years old, a peacetime pilot with 5 kills and a reputation for precise tactical thinking. He does not tolerate excuses or doctrine that costs lives. The issue, he tells the assembled pilots, is that we are not fast enough. We are not high enough. We are not doing what needs to be done. The enemy climbs above us, dives on the bombers, and climbs back out before we can turn inside them. By the time we reach their altitude, they are already diving again. This is a mathematics problem, and mathematics has no solutions I can give you. He pauses. The tent is silent except for the sound of ceiling fans that barely move the humid air. What I can tell you is this: do not try to fight them at high altitude. Do not follow them above 20,000 feet. Let them have the sky. Stay close to the bombers. When they dive, you are already positioned to turn into their run and disrupt their aim. When they climb out, you cannot catch them, but you can turn to meet the next dive. The job is to make them less effective, not to win a turning fight. Accept what we cannot do and do what we can do. That is survival. It is sound doctrine, born from experience and physics. But it also means accepting that the enemy controls the fight. It means accepting losses. It means the bombers will get shot at, and some will go down, and no American pilot will have prevented it. Thomas listens. He hears the mathematics in Chandler's voice. He also hears the resignation. On June 6th, Thomas flies his 6th mission. Escort for 12 B-29s bound for a rail yard near Manila. The weather is marginal. Cloud layers stack from 5,000 feet up to 22,000. The bombers are late forming up. The P-40 flight orbits over the rendezvous point, burning fuel, waiting. Thomas flies element lead, a position he was promoted to 3 days ago. His wingman is a pilot named Morrison, a 2nd lieutenant from Oklahoma with 8 missions and an easy confidence that comes from having survived 8 times. Morrison flies loose, checking instruments every minute, scanning for bandits, but not tense. Not like Thomas. Thomas is tense. His hands grip the stick tighter than they need to. His breathing is controlled, deliberate, the way his mother taught him to breathe during the earthquake drill in 1938 when he was 12 and terrified the earth would open and swallow him. She was right then. Breathing helped. The bombers form up. The formation is tight as it can be with aircraft that cannot maneuver. 12 superfortresses in 3 boxes. Each box bristles with .50 caliber guns. Against fighters, it is formidable. Against coordinated enemy attack from above, it is like a sailing ship trying to defend itself against aircraft. The formation crosses the coast at 15,000 feet. The flak begins immediately. Black puffs stitching the sky. The formation holds. Thomas holds position 200 feet behind the nearest bomber's right wing. Morrison flies offset to his left, watching his 6 o'clock, watching for enemy fighters. 20 minutes into enemy territory, the radio crackles with the call Thomas has been waiting for and dreading. Bandits high. Estimated 6, maybe 8. 20,000 feet, 2 o'clock. The Japanese have committed their fighters. The interception is closing. The squadron commander's voice is steady. Stay with the bombers. Do not chase. Let them come to us. But they do not come to the bombers. They climb higher. They position themselves for a diving attack from above and behind. This is their tactic. This is what they have learned works. Thomas sees the first one. A flash of sunlight off a metal fuselage. The enemy fighters are so high they are almost abstract, points of light rather than aircraft. The P-40 flight is at 14,000 feet. The enemy is 6,000 feet above. The physics are simple and brutal. They will dive. The P-40s cannot climb to meet them. The fighters will have all the speed advantage in the world. The first dive comes without warning. An enemy fighter rolls inverted and drops. 3 seconds later, it is screaming past the bomber formation at 500 miles per hour. Tracer fire stitches the sky. A bomber's right outboard engine suddenly trails smoke. But the burst was short. The bomber holds formation. The enemy fighter pulls out and climbs away. Then the second one dives. And the third. It is coordinated, disciplined attack. 5 Japanese fighters rotate through dives. Each one gets maybe 4 seconds of gun firing before they have to pull out and climb back for position. The American fighters try to turn into the runs, but by the time they turn, the enemy is already climbing. It is like fighting ghosts. Morrison's voice comes through the radio, tight. 2 o'clock high rolling in. Thomas sees it. A key, 84 Frank, faster than the Zero, with better climb performance. It has already begun the dive. Morrison turns hard into it. The turn is aggressive, nearly 5 gs. The Frank sees the turn, aborts the dive, and climbs away. Morrison cannot follow. His engine is not powerful enough. His altitude is not high enough. Thomas watches it climb. The Frank reaches 20,000 feet. It turns. It positions itself for another dive. It dives again. This time, the dive comes at the lead bomber. The B-29 has already been hit twice. One of its engines is feathering. It is struggling to keep position. The Frank's dive is perfect. 600 miles per hour closure. The guns fire. Tracers walk across the bomber's fuselage. The tail section suddenly disintegrates. The bomber yaws hard right, out of formation. Thomas is now separated from Morrison. He has lost position. The radio is chaos. 2 more enemy fighters are descending. The formation is spreading. 1 bomber is on fire. Another is dropping back. Chandler's voice cuts through the radio. Werner, get back to formation. Thomas banks hard left. He climbs toward the bomber formation. But in climbing, he has sacrificed speed. The enemy fighters see the opportunity. 2 Ki-84s peel off from their climb. They dive at Thomas. He sees them late. A flash of metal. Tracers beginning to arc. He is at 14,000 feet with 2 enemy fighters at 16,000 feet and diving at him. The closure is 500 miles per hour combined. He has maybe 6 seconds before they reach effective firing range. Thomas does what doctrine says. He banks hard into them. He trades altitude for turning room. He pulls the stick back. 3 gs. 4. His vision begins to tunnel. The Ki-84s cannot turn with him. They overshoot, their dives continuing past him. But as they pass, they are still firing. Rounds punch through the wing. A shell cracks the windscreen. Hydraulic fluid sprays from a severed line. One of the Ki-84s pulls out of the dive 5,000 feet below Thomas. It is climbing fast. The other one continues diving, trying to set up for another pass. Thomas's engine coughs. The oil pressure gauge flickers. He has taken damage. Not critical, not yet, but the aircraft is wounded. He is supposed to return to formation. He is supposed to accept what he cannot do. But the Ki-84 that dived past him is now repositioning for another pass. It is climbing. In 30 seconds, it will have altitude again. In 45 seconds, it will be diving at him again. This time, it will have a better angle. This time, the pass will be fatal. Thomas makes a decision that no manual supports. He does not climb. He does not dive. He pushes the stick forward and banks into a tight, descending spiral. His turn radius is tight. Too tight. The airframe shudders. He feels a moment of lift, a buffeting sensation that comes right before a stall. The Ki-84 tries to follow. It is too fast. It cannot turn tightly enough. The turn radius it can maintain is larger. The pilot tries anyway. The aircraft's angle of attack increases. The pilot is fighting the forces, trying to force the aircraft into a turn it is not designed for at this speed. And then it happens. The Ki-84's wing stalls. Not a gentle wing drop. A violent snap. The aircraft flips inverted. The pilot ejects immediately. The canopy blows off, and the pilot tumbles out. The parachute opens a second later. But it is too late. The key, 84, is already spinning. It is already 5,000 feet below. The pilot is safe. The aircraft is not. It tumbles through the clouds below. Thomas levels out. His hands are shaking. His oil pressure is still dropping. His engine is running rough. He has maybe 10 minutes of flight time before he is in serious trouble. He turns toward the coast. He turns toward friendly territory. The second key, 84, is still above him, still diving. But Thomas is now at 10,000 feet, descending fast, and the key, 84, is committed to a dive that will carry it all the way to the ocean if the pilot does not pull out soon. The Japanese pilot pulls hard. The G-forces are immense. The aircraft groans. The pilot recovers, but he is now at 5,000 feet, alone, and Morrison has repositioned and has the advantage. Morrison fires. The tracer stream walks across the key 84's fuselage. Smoke pours from the engine. The Japanese pilot banks hard left and heads north, back toward friendly territory, crippled but flying. Thomas makes it back to the coast with his oil pressure in the red. He puts the P-40 down on a forward airfield with one engine at partial power. The landing is controlled but hard. The aircraft touches down. The brakes grab. He rolls out at the far end of the runway and kills the engines. Ground crew rushes out. They see the damage. Shattered windscreen. Punctured wing. Hydraulic fluid everywhere. Bullet holes along the fuselage you could count without effort. Thomas climbs out of the cockpit. His legs are unsteady. He walks to the operations tent. He sits on a camp chair. He does not speak for several minutes. When he does, he asks a question no one expects. Why did it stall? Thomas spends the next 48 hours asking the same question in different ways. The engineering officer at the forward airfield cannot answer it. The mechanics cannot answer it. He reads the aircraft recognition manual for the key, 84. He sketches diagrams in the sand with a stick, drawing wing angles and turn radius curves. He does not sleep. The question consumes him because he understands that the answer is the difference between survival and death. The key, 84, is faster at altitude. It climbs better. It dives faster. By every metric, it is a superior aircraft. But it stalled in a turn because of a principle Thomas half remembers from ground school. Wing loading. The weight of an aircraft divided by the area of its wings. A heavier aircraft needs more wing area or more speed to generate enough lift to sustain a turn. The P-40 is heavy for its size. It has relatively small wings, but its weight distribution is different. Its wing loading is lower than the key 84's. In a tight turn at low speed, the P-40 can turn inside the key 84. But at high speed, in a dive, the roles reverse. The question Thomas asks himself is, what if you could change the equation? What if you used the P-40's disadvantage, its weight, to force the enemy into a maneuver it could not sustain? He returns to Clark Field on June 8th. His aircraft is being repaired. He does not have another assignment. He has time. He walks to the flight line in the early morning, before the temperature climbs above 90. He watches mechanics work on the P-40s. He asks questions. The crew chiefs like him because he listens and does not interrupt. One crew chief, a sergeant named Bill Krause, has been maintaining P-40s since before the war. He knows the aircraft the way Thomas knows his parents, not from studying them, but from living with them. Thomas asks him about turn radius at different speeds. Why are you asking? Krause says, because I need to understand how to kill the key, 84, in a turning fight. Krause nods. He sets down his wrench. He walks to the aircraft he is working on. He points to the wings. The P-40's wings are small. They generate lift, sure, but not as much as a bigger wing. At high altitude, low speed, we are at a disadvantage. The Zero, the Frank, they can turn inside us all day. But here is the thing. He points to the fuselage. We are heavy. We have a powerful engine. In a dive, we can turn faster because we have the speed and weight to sustain a tight turn radius. A lighter aircraft cannot do that. It will stall. What if you dove and then immediately turned? Thomas asks. Krause considers this. You would lose altitude fast. You would burn energy. But the enemy would have to follow. If he cannot follow, he stalls. Thomas finishes. Maybe. If the timing is right. If you have enough energy. If you are lucky. Thomas sits with this for 2 days. He does not sleep much. He sketches more diagrams. He calculates turn radius at different speeds using the P-40's known specifications. He calculates the same for the Ki-84 using intelligence data from shot-down aircraft. The numbers tell a story. There is a narrow window of speed and altitude where a P-40 can turn tighter than a Ki-84. It is not at high altitude. It is not at cruise speed. It is in the intermediate regime, 8 to 12,000 feet, 200 to 300 miles per hour, where the P-40's weight becomes an advantage, not a liability. But getting to that regime requires diving away from the enemy. It requires trading altitude for speed. It requires accepting that you are moving away from the bomber formation, moving away from support, moving into a space where you are alone with the enemy. On June 10th, he mentions it casually to Morrison during breakfast. Morrison is eating powdered eggs that smell like chalk and disappointment. What if you dove toward the enemy instead of climbing? Thomas says. Morrison looks at him like he has suggested something obscene. You would be moving away from him. He would climb and re-engage. Not if he follows you, Thomas says. If he follows you into the dive and tries to turn inside you, he stalls. And if he does not follow, then you are wrong, and you return to altitude and try again. Morrison shakes his head. That is the opposite of doctrine. Doctrine says climb. Doctrine says fight where you have advantages. Doctrine says do not fly the P-40 above 25,000 feet, either. But we do it anyway when we have to. Morrison does not argue further. He goes back to his eggs, but he mentions it to the flight leader, a captain named Richard Wells. Wells is 28 years old, with 12 victories and a reputation for creative thinking. He listens to Thomas. He does not dismiss the idea immediately. Instead, he asks Thomas to explain the physics. Thomas does. He uses the dining tent table as a model. He uses salt shakers to represent aircraft. He shows the turn radius at different speeds. He shows how the weight of the P-40 becomes an advantage in certain regimes. Wells listens. When Thomas finishes, Wells asks a question. How do you test this? You need altitude and a second aircraft. You get 2 pilots, one in AP-40 and one in AP-40 modified to simulate the Ki-84's turn radius. You run the maneuver at safe altitude with a third aircraft watching to ensure no collision. You test the timing, the speed, the dive angle. You see if the numbers translate to reality. Wells nods. I will bring this to Major Chandler. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Thomas does not expect Chandler to agree. Chandler is practical. He believes in survival, not experimentation. But Chandler listens. He reads Thomas's sketches. He asks questions. He tells Wells to organize the test. The test is scheduled for June 15th, at sunrise, over the open ocean where there are no witnesses to an experiment that might end badly. June 15th dawns clear. High thin clouds at 20,000 feet. Light winds. Perfect visibility. Thomas arrives at the flight line at 0500 hours. His aircraft has been prepared. The weapons have been removed, so there is no risk of accidental discharge. The engineering officer has fitted a second aircraft with trim adjustments designed to increase its turn radius, simulating the Ki-84's handling characteristics at the speeds Thomas wants to test. The pilots are Thomas in the P-40 and a senior captain named Douglas Price in the modified P-40. Price has 15 kills. He has flown 300 hours of combat. He knows what an aircraft can do because he has pushed them to the edge 1,000 times. He is not skeptical of Thomas's idea because he is already open to new ideas. He is skeptical because he has learned that most new ideas end with impact on water. But Price also understands energy management the way a musician understands rhythm. He knows how to feel an aircraft's limits. He agrees to test it. A third aircraft, flown by Morrison, will observe from above. Morrison has a camera mounted in the wing. If something goes wrong, he will document what went wrong. If something goes right, he will document that too. Thomas and Price take off at 0530 hours. They climb to 15,000 feet and turn eastward, away from land, away from any possibility of debris falling on populated areas. Morrison follows above, at 16,000 feet, the camera ready. Thomas reaches altitude. He radios to Price. Ready to begin the first run. I will start a shallow dive and turn hard left at 250 miles per hour. I want you to follow as closely as you can maintain control. Price acknowledges. Thomas rolls into a shallow dive. The airspeed climbs. 200, 220, 240. At 250 miles per hour, Thomas pulls the stick back. The P-40's nose comes up. He banks hard left. The turn is aggressive. Not maximum, but close. The G-forces compress his chest. He can feel the airframe beginning to approach its structural limits. He feels the wing starting to buffet slightly. The stall warning. He maintains the turn for 3 seconds. Then he eases off. The P-40 responds. The turn radius was tight, tighter than anything an aircraft his weight should be able to manage. Price flew the maneuver too, following Thomas's lead. But in Price's modified aircraft, the turn radius was larger. Price had to ease the stick forward before completing the turn. The G-forces were too great for the aircraft's lighter wing loading to sustain. They level out at 12,000 feet. Price radios. I felt it. The aircraft wants to widen the turn at that speed. You maintain tighter control. Can you repeat it? Thomas asks. I can try. They run the maneuver again. Same result. Thomas's P-40 turns tighter. Price's modified aircraft, despite being lighter, cannot sustain the turn radius. Then Thomas decides to test the full sequence. He climbs back to 16,000 feet. He sets up for a dive. At this altitude, diving at 250 miles per hour, he will descend 1,000 feet in the turn. It is altitude lost. It is energy spent. But it is also a maneuver that trades altitude for superior turning performance. He rolls into the dive. Price follows. The airspeed climbs. 200, 250, 300 miles per hour. At this speed, Thomas's P-40 is falling through the air like a stone. But it is falling fast. It is falling with power and weight behind it. At 300 miles per hour, Thomas pulls back hard on the stick. It is tighter than before. Much tighter. The G-forces spike. His vision grays. He is pulling maximum turn radius without stalling. The P-40 responds. It carves a turn so tight that Price's modified aircraft cannot follow. Price has to ease the stick forward immediately or risk stalling. Price tries anyway. He pushes the stick back harder. He wants to stay with Thomas. The turn radius he needs to maintain is too tight. The angle of attack increases. The aircraft is approaching the stall. Thomas sees it happening. Price's wing dips. The aircraft is unstable. Price is fighting the controls. And then Price eases the stick forward, recovering, but the maneuver is complete. Price could not stay with Thomas. If this were combat, Thomas would be killing Price right now. They level out at 10,000 feet. Morrison radios down from above. I got all of it on film. The second aircraft definitely could not match the turn radius. The stall warning came up in the second aircraft right before he eased off. Price's voice comes through calm and measured. That works. I do not know if it works in actual combat, but it works here. The lighter aircraft cannot turn tighter at that speed regime. They repeat the maneuver 5 more times, varying the dive angle, the turn entry speed, the G-forces. Every time, the result is the same. Thomas's P-40 can turn tighter. Price's modified aircraft cannot follow without risking a stall. After the 6th run, they return to base. Thomas lands with precision. Price lands beside him. They taxi to parking. Ground crew rushes out to secure the aircraft. Thomas climbs out of the cockpit. His hands are shaking slightly from adrenaline. Price is already standing on the wing, waiting. Price removes his helmet. His face is flushed from the G-forces and the oxygen mask. He extends his hand. You are onto something, Price says. It is not safe. It will not work against every fighter. But in the right circumstances, against the right opponent, at the right speed and altitude, it is a maneuver that could change the outcome. Thomas shakes his hand. He does not speak. He is processing what he just learned. The numbers were correct. The physics worked. The maneuver was real. Within 3 hours, Major Chandler has reviewed the gun camera footage. Within 4 hours, he has called a meeting of all pilot officers. Within 6 hours, word is spreading through the squadron. Within 12 hours, pilots from other squadrons are arriving to learn about the technique. Chandler issues a formal order. Effective immediately, P-40 pilots are authorized to use a high-speed turning maneuver at intermediate altitude when engaged with enemy fighters. The maneuver requires a shallow dive. a hard turn at 250 to 300 miles per hour, and acceptance of altitude loss. The maneuver is optional, not required, but pilots who master it have demonstrated superior combat performance in controlled testing. The order does not mention Thomas by name. It does not mention that a teenager from Nebraska invented it. It simply authorizes the technique and trusts pilots to use judgment in its application. 2 days later, Thomas is flying bomber escort. The bombers are B-29s again, bound for a target near Davao. The weather is clear. The bomber formation is tight. Everything is routine until it is not. The bandits are called at 20,000 feet. 8 enemy fighters. Thomas is at 12,000 feet with his element. The enemy is 2 miles away and descending. The attack is forming. Chandler's voice comes through the radio. Stay with the bombers. Watch for diving attacks. The first key, 84 rolls inverted and drops. Thomas sees it coming. The dive is high speed, maybe 500 miles per hour. The fighter is closing fast on the right side of the bomber formation. Thomas banks hard right. He turns into the diving attack. The key, 84 pilot sees the turn, aborts the dive, and climbs away. The attack is broken. The second key, 84 dives from a different angle. Thomas cannot intercept. But Morrison is positioned better. Morrison turns hard into the attack. The key, 84 pilot aborts and climbs. 3 more pass through the formation without achieving solid firing runs. But the fifth key, 84 has better timing. It dives from directly above the lead bomber. By the time Thomas turns into it, the key, 84, is already firing. Tracers walk across the bomber's fuselage. A window shatters. The bomber's left inboard engine suddenly trails smoke. The key, 84, continues the dive. Thomas cannot catch it. But as the key, 84, passes below the bomber, climbing away and returning for altitude, Thomas banks hard to follow. He is now separated from the bomber formation. He is now committed to this fight. The key, 84, climbs. Thomas climbs after it. But the key, 84, is too fast at altitude. It pulls away. It reaches 16,000 feet. It turns. It positions itself for another dive. Thomas is at 14,000 feet. He is moving slower than the key, 84. By all the normal rules of dogfighting, Thomas is losing this fight. The key, 84, is faster, higher, and has the advantage of the dive. But Thomas knows something the key, 84 pilot does not. As the key, 84 begins the second dive, Thomas does not climb to meet it. Instead, he banks hard right and points the nose down. He is now diving toward the key, 84, not away from it. He is trading altitude for speed. The airspeed climbs. 190 miles per hour. 200, 220, 250. The key, 84 pilot, sees the American diving at him. This is unexpected. The key, 84 pilot was expecting the American to climb or turn away. Instead, the American is diving toward him, turning hard into the dive. The turn radius impossibly tight for an aircraft that weight. The key, 84 pilot, tries to follow the turn. The closure is rapid now. The key, 84, dives hard, trying to match Thomas's turn radius. But at 300 miles per hour, the key, 84, cannot turn as tightly. The pilot pulls back on the stick. The angle of attack increases. The wing is approaching stall. Thomas is not stalling. Thomas's P-40 is turning inside the key, 84. The turn radius difference is less than 1 second, but in combat, 1 second is an eternity. Thomas comes around on the key, 84's 6 o'clock, behind and below. The key, 84, is still trying to maintain the turn. The pilot pulls harder. The wing stalls. The key, 84, snaps left. The pilot ejects immediately. The canopy blows off. The pilot tumbles out. The parachute opens a second later. But the aircraft is already tumbling. It is already 7,000 feet below. The pilot is safe, but the aircraft is lost. Thomas rolls upright. He has lost 2,000 feet in the maneuver. But he has killed an enemy fighter. He has proven the technique works in actual combat. His fuel is now critical. He turns toward home. He returns to base with reserves so low that he has to carefully manage every movement to avoid flaming out. He lands. He climbs out of the cockpit. The ground crew is already surrounding the aircraft, counting the bullet holes from the earlier pass, checking the damage. Thomas walks to operations. He files his report. The encounter is logged. 1 key, 84 destroyed. By that evening, word has spread. Thomas is being called the pilot who killed a P-84 using the new turning technique. The technique is no longer theoretical. It is proven in actual combat. But Thomas knows something the other pilots do not. The maneuver is not a sure thing. It is a percentage play. It works when the enemy is moving fast, when the enemy is committed to a turn, when the altitude and speed are exactly right. It fails when the enemy refuses to turn, when the enemy breaks off the dive, when the enemy has any hesitation. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas flies more missions. His kill count climbs to 3, then 4, then 5. Each one uses a variation on the technique. Each one combines the high-speed turn with knowledge of where the enemy will be, with timing, with luck. But not every pass works. On June 28th, Thomas is bounced by 2 P-84s. He tries the maneuver on the first one. The enemy pilot sees what is happening and breaks off the dive, climbing away without committing. Thomas loses the opportunity. The second P-84 gets a solid firing pass. Rounds punch through the fuselage. An oil line ruptures. Thomas has to limp back to base on half power, nursing a wounded engine. On July 2nd, Thomas is covering bombers over the coast of Mindanao. A Frank rolls in at high altitude. Thomas turns hard into the dive. The maneuver is executed perfectly. The Frank cannot match the turn. The pilot tries anyway. The wing stalls. Thomas closes for the kill shot. But as Thomas squeezes the trigger, something goes wrong. A second Frank, coming from above and behind, fires on Thomas. The rounds are high. They miss the cockpit but punch through the wing. Thomas's engine screams. Something has broken internally. The engine is failing. Thomas breaks off the attack. He turns for home. His engine is dying. He has 10 minutes of flight time, maybe less. He makes it to the coast. He makes it to friendly territory. He puts the damaged P-40 down in a rice paddy outside a forward airfield. The landing is hard. The aircraft bounces. The landing gear collapses. The P-40 tumbles on its nose. Thomas climbs out of the wreckage. He is unhurt. The aircraft is destroyed. It is his 4th aircraft lost to combat damage. He has also lost count of how many he has damaged. This is what the technique costs. It pushes the P-40 to the edge of its envelope. It extracts everything the aircraft can give. But eventually, the aircraft gives up. Thomas walks to the forward airfield. He is assigned a new P-40 that evening. Within 48 hours, he is back in combat. By the middle of July, the technique has spread beyond Thomas's squadron. Pilots from other units have been brought in for briefings. Gun camera footage has been distributed. The technique is taught in morning briefings, explained in debriefing sessions, and discussed in every pilot-ready room in the theater. The resistance from senior pilots fades quickly. The technique works. The numbers prove it. Between June 15th and July 31st, P-40 squadrons using the technique report a 12% reduction in combat losses. 12% does not sound like much, but 12% means lives. It means pilots who lived who would have died under the old doctrine. On July 20th, the 14th Air Force issues a formal technical bulletin. It outlines the high-speed turning maneuver, describes the altitude and speed parameters, explains the physics of wing loading and turn radius. It credits field development of the technique to unnamed squadron pilots. It authorizes its use as an emergency evasive maneuver when engaged in combat with faster, lighter enemy fighters. The technical bulletin is printed and distributed to every fighter squadron in the Pacific Theater. Within weeks, it is also sent to the European theater, where P-40 squadrons operating in North Africa adopt it. The maneuver becomes known by different names: the Werner turn, the high-speed corkscrew, the intermediate altitude reversal. But the technique remains the same. Training units in the continental United States begin incorporating it into fighter training. Cadets learn it at the same time they learn standard dogfighting techniques. It becomes part of the curriculum, taught with the same authority as anything from the manuals. The Japanese intelligence services notice. Captured pilots report American fighters performing maneuvers that should not be possible. Japanese pilots who face the technique report encounters where they cannot match the American turn radius at certain speeds. Some Japanese pilots begin to avoid diving at American fighters, preferring to climb and regain altitude, allowing the Americans to dictate the next pass. The psychological advantage shifts. It is subtle. It is not a game changer that wins battles. But it is a shift. American fighters, previously at a disadvantage in vertical maneuvering, now have an option. They can trade altitude for turning room. They can use their weight as an advantage. They are no longer passive. Thomas himself becomes a quiet legend. Pilots call him Vern. They know he invented the technique. They know he has 5 confirmed kills using variations on the maneuver. They also know he has been shot down 4 times. He has bailed out twice. His aircraft are always damaged, sometimes catastrophically. He pushes too hard. He stays too long. He pursues when others would break off. But he survives. And that is what matters. On August 10, 1944, Thomas is promoted to first lieutenant. On August 25th, he is assigned to headquarters as a tactics officer. His combat flying is done. He will train other pilots. He will refine the technique. He will help distribute it across the Pacific theater. He does not receive a medal for inventing the technique. The citation for his promotion mentions his effectiveness in combat and his willingness to develop new tactical procedures. It does not mention the technique by name. It does not mention that he invented it. By the time he leaves combat flying, the technique has been abstracted, institutionalized, and made part of the doctrine. The inventor's name is becoming invisible. The war ends 14 months later. Germany surrenders in May 1945. Japan surrenders on August 15th. Thomas is stationed in Japan as part of the occupation force. He is flying liaison missions, delivering officers and messages between headquarters. The combat flying is over. He returns to the United States in December 1945. He is promoted to captain. He is offered a choice: remain in the Air Force as a regular officer, or separate from active duty and return to civilian life. He chooses to separate. He returns to Nebraska in January 1946. Scottsbluff has changed. The Depression is over. The war is over. The grain elevator his father operated before the war has been modernized. The town has electricity in more places. The roads are better. Everything is superficially the same and fundamentally different. Thomas takes a job with a grain company. He manages shipments and logistics. It is not exciting work, but it is reliable. It uses the organizational skills he developed in the Air Force. It pays enough to rent an apartment and eventually buy a small house. He marries a girl he knew before the war, a teacher named Sarah. They have 2 children. He works for the same grain company for 42 years. He does not talk about the war. Sarah knows he flew fighters in the Pacific. She knows he was shot down. She does not press for details. When their children ask about the war, Thomas tells them to study it in school. That is where the real history is. In 1964, Thomas receives a letter from the Air Force Historical Society. They are researching the history of P-40 tactics during the Pacific War. They have found references to a high-speed turning maneuver that was developed in 1944. They have traced it to Thomas's squadron. They want to interview him. Thomas agrees. He drives to the Regional Air Force office in Omaha. He sits with a historian and a tape recorder. He tells the story, the test flights, the combat missions, the technique. He speaks in the same slow, precise way he spoke to Major Chandler 30 years earlier. He does not embellish. He does not claim credit that he does not deserve. The historian asks if Thomas knew at the time that he had invented something important. Thomas says no. He thought he was solving a problem. He thought if he tested it carefully and it worked, then other pilots could use it. He did not think about it being important. He thought about it being useful. The historian asks if Thomas is proud of it. Thomas is quiet for a long moment. Then he says, "I am proud that it helped. That pilots who would have died did not die. That is all that matters." The interview is recorded and preserved in the Air Force Historical Archives. A researcher reading it in 2003 will use it as a primary source for a paper on tactical innovation in World War II. The paper will mention the high-speed turning maneuver. It will credit field development to unnamed P-40 pilots. It will not mention Thomas by name. Thomas dies on March 15, 2004, at the age of 78. His obituary in the Scottsbluff Star mentions his service in World War II. It does not mention the technique. It does not mention that he was credited with 5 aerial victories. It says only that he served with distinction in the Pacific Theater and returned home to build a life in the community he loved. The obituary is 3 paragraphs long. The longest paragraph is about his work at the grain company. The shortest paragraph is about the war. At his funeral, several people stand and speak about Thomas. A former student of his daughter mentions that Thomas once helped her with a physics problem, drawing diagrams in a notebook with the same precision he applied to everything else. A neighbor talks about how Thomas maintained his house, how careful he was, how thorough. No one mentions the war. After the service, a man approaches Thomas's family. He is 79 years old, a retired Air Force pilot. He tells them that he learned the high-speed turning maneuver in 1944, that it saved his life 3 times in combat, that he always believed it was invented by a pilot named Verne. He thanks them for his life. Then he leaves. The high-speed turning maneuver developed by Thomas Werner in 1944 survives the war by decades. It is refined and adapted for new aircraft. The principle remains constant. Use weight and power to turn tighter than lighter, more advanced aircraft at specific speed regimes. When jet fighters arrive in the early 1950s, the technique is modified but not abandoned. The F-86 Sabre pilots learn variations of it. The MiG-15, despite being lighter and more maneuverable at altitude, cannot always turn inside an F-86 at certain speeds, particularly during diving attacks. Korean War pilots, many of them trained on P-40s in the late Pacific War, apply the principle against Chinese and Soviet fighters. The technique is not always called the Werner turn. It is called different things by different squadrons. The high-speed scissors, the intermediate altitude recovery, the weight advantage turn. But the principle is identical. In the post-war analysis of air combat, aeronautical engineers studying dogfighting note the importance of energy management. They cite the principle of weight and power allowing tighter turning at certain speed regimes. They do not cite Thomas Werner. He is not in the footnotes. He is not in the bibliography. But the principle lives. It is taught in fighter pilot training for the next 3 decades. The F-4 Phantom pilots in Vietnam learn it. The F-15 Eagle pilots in the 1970s learn it. Each generation of fighter pilots learns that there are regimes where superior technology can be defeated by understanding how energy converts to turning radius, how weight can be an advantage instead of a liability, how accepting certain disadvantages can create unexpected advantages. In 1982, the Air Force publishes a comprehensive study of fighter tactics and maneuvers. The section on high-speed turning includes a footnote referencing a field development in the Pacific War that demonstrated unconventional approaches to energy management during vertical maneuvering. The footnote does not name Thomas. The archives are searched, but the original documentation is scattered, archived, and difficult to trace. The technique appears as part of the general knowledge of the Air Force, its origins lost to institutional bureaucracy. But the mechanics remember. The old crew chiefs, the ones who maintained P-40s in 1944, told stories at reunions. They remembered the pilot named Verne. They remembered the young officer who asked too many questions, who walked the flight line at dawn sketching diagrams, who was willing to risk himself to test an idea that no one else believed in. They remembered the day he proved that physics worked, that carefully tested theory could translate to combat performance, that sometimes the answer comes not from authority, but from thinking carefully about a problem. One crew chief, Bill Krause, the same sergeant who had discussed turn radius with Thomas in 1944, lived until 1998. In 1995, at an Air Force historical symposium, he told the story of the young pilot from Nebraska who discovered that a heavy fighter could turn tighter than a light one at certain speeds. He said the pilot's name was Verne. He said Verne was the smartest pilot he ever met, and not because Verne was flashy or brave or brilliant. Verne was smart because Verne thought about problems before he solved them. That story was recorded. It is part of the Air Force Historical Archives. A researcher looking for information about P-40 tactics in the Pacific War will find it. A student writing a paper on tactical innovation will read it. A pilot training at a modern fighter squadron will perhaps encounter it in a historical context, learning that tactical innovation comes from thinking carefully, testing thoroughly, and trusting physics over convention. Aviation is built on moments like this, not on grand theories or billion-dollar programs, but on individuals who notice what others miss, who test assumptions, who risk themselves to verify intuition. Thomas Werner did not revolutionize fighter tactics. He did not invent new physics. He simply observed, calculated, tested, and trusted logic. The P-40 Warhawk is gone now except in museums. The technique that Thomas developed is taught in modified form. Its origins obscure, its inventor's name largely forgotten. But the principle endures. When a fighter pilot understands that weight and power can be advantages in certain regimes, when a pilot knows that sometimes the answer to being outmaneuvered is to accept disadvantage and exploit it, that pilot is learning the lesson Thomas Werner taught in 1944. Some legacies are carved in stone. Others are written in the physics of survival. Thomas Werner's contribution is measured not in medals or recognition, but in pilots who recovered from attacks they should not have survived, who trusted in a maneuver that no textbook taught them, who lived because someone understood that sometimes the answer is not force but patience, not climbing but diving, not fighting the problem but understanding it first. The name fades. The physics remains. And that is how innovation survives. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.